Can't have two cups, Jason. Can't have two colors.
What the?
Are there any matters that we need to take up before we bring jurors in?
No, sir.
All right, you'll go ahead and bring jurors, please. All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I believe, let me ask the state, is there further evidence for the state?
State calls Theodore Miller.
Would you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right, please? You solemnly swear the testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated.
Ms. Shikita?
State your name, sir.
My name is Theodore Miller.
And Mr. Miller, can you tell the jury how you're employed?
I am a Kane Public Safety Officer for North Hills.
For North Hills?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
are you specifically located at the North Hills property?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you work on occasion with Captain Way?
Yes, he's my supervisor.
Can you tell us, generally speaking, what some of your duties and responsibilities are with King?
Well, generally, we check the area, check buildings, make sure everything is safe, no kind of damages, no fire, no break-ins or anything of that nature.
And if, say, a patron has an issue and needs some assistance, would that be something that you would help?
And we would take care of that too, yes, ma'am.
Do you know, generally speaking, about how many folks work with King Security in the North Hills area?
On our roster, I think there's like 27 people, I think.
And were you employed in that capacity back in May of 2013?
Yes, ma'am, I was. I was a public safety officer.
And are you familiar with the Allister apartment complex?
Yes, ma'am.
We've heard a lot of testimony that in May of 2013, it was still fairly new and under construction. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do. Yes, ma'am.
As a officer with Kane, did you have any responsibilities in that particular area? That is the Allister area.
Yes, ma'am. We would go check, make sure no one was breaking in the area, just make sure everything was safe, to be more specific.
And if I may approach, Judge,
Yes.
I'm going to show you this large aerial map that's already been introduced into evidence as State's Exhibit number 6, and ask if you recognize State's Exhibit 6.
Yes, I do.
And looking at State's Exhibit 6, does this appear to be at least close in time to when this homicide occurred, that is back in May 2013, with the 3 buildings either constructed or under construction?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us the sort of general area that you would go around to patrol and make sure that everything was okay in terms of the Allister?
At the time, this was the only location to get in. Everything else was fenced off. There was a fence right here at the mailboxes, but that was the general in and out location right there.
Okay. And this whole area that's sort of tan in color that looks like under construction, were you making sure that everything was okay in that area?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Had you had any problems in that particular construction area?
Yes, ma'am. There was a lot of people were still in copper in the area, so we had to check that area.
And how often would you say one of you all would try to go out and check that?
Between an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes, sometime in that area.
Do you recall the evening or the early morning hours right before Miss Huggins-Jones was murdered?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you on duty during that time?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
Do you recall about what time, if at all, you went through that particular area to check and see if things were okay?
Yes, ma'am. Between 02 and 02:30 hours, I made a round in that area.
And just to be clear, is that 2 to 2:30 in the morning?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Do you recall seeing anything unusual at that time?
Nothing was out of the ordinary. Everything looked normal, so to speak.
And you had said that that one building that we've been talking about was the one that was occupied. Did you see any movement anywhere near the...
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
That building, okay.
No.
If you had seen some, say, people out of place or something unusual, would you made a note of it and check that out?
We would have made a note of it, and we had authority to go ask why were they there or what were they doing there at the time.
And so on that evening hour, did you recall anything out of the ordinary whatsoever?
No, ma'am.
Do you recall whether or not even any of the lights were on in the building? Did you even make note of that?
I'm not aware. I can't answer the question because I'm not sure.
And did you find out that there had been an incident in that building? Was it before you left that morning, or had you already gone home?
I had already went home. Yes, ma'am.
During the course of the investigation, did someone from the Raleigh Police Department come to talk to you about what you had seen or not seen the night before?
Yes, they did.
And are you still employed with Kane Security?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes. Kane Security does work at the mall.
Yes, sir, we did.
And without telling us what those conversations were, do you know if Kane Security had conversations, worked with the Raleigh Police Department about anything that happened at the mall that evening?
Say that one more time.
I'm sorry. Without telling us what the conversations are, do you know if Kane Security had any discussions with Raleigh Police Department about what may have gone on in the mall that evening?
If I understand your question, yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Anything further?
No, nothing further.
Redirect.
No, sir.
Thank you, sir. You may step down.
Thank you.
May this witness be released.
Yes.
Sir, you're released from your subpoena. You're free to go.
Thank you.
Further evidence for the state.
State calls Captain Reeves.
Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right. Do you solemnly swear testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated.
Ms. Shakita.
Please state your name, sir.
My name is James Edward Reeves, captain with the Raleigh Fire Department.
And Captain Reeves, how long have you been with the Raleigh Fire Department?
Be 28 years tomorrow. My anniversary will be tomorrow.
You close to retirement?
Trying to.
Okay. Can you tell the jury what some of your responsibilities are as a captain with the Raleigh Fire Department?
I have to oversee all the operations on the engine company on a day-to-day basis, and this includes our cleaning of the apparatus, training, and also being in charge of being the incident commander or just in charge of all calls, whether it's medical or fire related.
Are you currently assigned to a particular station within the city of Raleigh?
I'm currently assigned to Station 9 at 4465 Six Forks Road.
And that address on Six Forks Road, is that the closest fire station to the North Hills area?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you working as a captain back in May of 2013 at that same station?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall being called to the 441 Alistair on the early morning hours of the 14th of May of 2013?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you're called to go to a particular area?
I don't exactly remember specifically the type of call, whether we were dispatched on an EMS call to respond with EMS, and it was either a medical nature unknown or unconscious subject, and I don't remember exactly what the disposition of the call was. So we went ahead and got on the truck, responded, license siren, and got to the scene, and went ahead and went to do patient care.
And when you get dispatched to go to a particular location, you said you're not sure what the nature of the call is. You try and get some information when you're en route to a particular area.
Yes, ma'am. We are provided what they call a rip and run sheet. It gives an address and it gives some basic information what 911 gathers. And it may say something is subject passed out, subject could have fallen off of a bicycle. You know, it's just kind of just a little small description of what to expect when you get there.
And that area at 4465 North Six Forks Road, how far away is it from the Alistair apartments?
It's probably about a mile maybe, or a mile and a quarter.
And do you recall if you are at the station when you got the call?
Yes, ma'am. We were at the station. We were preparing for shift change because it was somewhere around 7:15, 7:30ish in the morning, somewhere around that time frame. So we were putting our gear on the truck and preparing for that.
So were y'all coming in, or were you the group that was leaving?
I was the group that was coming in.
Okay. And when you went to that 441, excuse me, Alistair, what, if anything, did you all do when you got there?
Once we arrived on the scene, I want to say the dispatcher updated the call and possibly said it may be actually saying a cardiac arrest. So that kind of, heightens the call a little bit more. So when we arrived on the scene, I exited off the truck and I went upstairs, and I believe I met with the contractor outside, who was the one who initially called it in, and he carried us into the bedroom, which I typically, like on an updated call like that, I go ahead and try to get into the building as quick to find out exactly what we have as the firefighter brings the equipment in.
I was going to ask it. So you go in the apartment.
So I go in the apartment first, and once I got into the room and established there was nothing that we could do life-saving wise, that this was going to be held off to be left as a crime scene investigation for the police department.
And just to be clear, as a firefighter, do you all do patient care and help to administer with sick folks as well?
Yes, ma'am, we sure do.
And you said that while you were going in, that some of your personnel were getting equipment. Do you recall how many people you had with you that day?
On the truck that morning, there was two other people, the lieutenant driving the truck and the firefighter on the back. The lieutenant, he predominantly stays with the truck. and the firefighter was bringing in emergency medical equipment.
Were you all the first emergency vehicle on scene?
Yes, ma'am.
And you said that you went back into the bedroom. Before you got to the bedroom door, did you notice anything unusual at that point?
Not really, because it was kind of like, I believe it was like a kitchen, living room area, and really that area didn't seem to really be out of disarray or anything. But once we got to the bedroom, that's where we ran into more things that were out of place.
And can you tell us generally what you saw that made you feel like it was out of place?
Furniture was kind of like torn apart, like a nightstand drawer was on the floor, the sheets and blankets and stuff were off the bed, and it looked like, you know, things just hadn't been like somebody just sleeping in their bed. It was kind of out of a normal process.
And I know at the time you didn't know who the person was, but did you ultimately find what later was identified as Ms. Huggins-Jones' body?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you describe for the jury the condition in which you saw it as the first responder there?
She was still lying on the bed. Her face was covered in blood, a lot of blood on each side of her head, on the sheets. That was one of the reasons we pretty much found out it was going to be more of an obvious death, because of the amount of blood that was by her head. And she was not under covers or anything. She was just laying on the bed, and there was a pillow, a large pillow on her left arm. And it's just, you know, she was in her night clothes, so you could tell she had been to bed.
Once you realized that, I think you said there wasn't anything you could do in terms of life-saving measures, what did you do at that point? I
secured the room, and completely let nobody enter the room. It was unnecessary, whether it was an EMS personnel or police officer, they would be allowed in, but I just went ahead and secured the room and kept anybody from entering the room at the time.
And why do you do that?
So the police officers, we would try to keep as much evidence for the police department, and nothing can get tainted or messed up for them.
Did you, when you went in just to check on her, to make efforts not to damage or move things in any way?
Yes, ma'am. Once I realized it seemed to be an obvious death, because of the skin color and the amount of blood loss, didn't even try to even touch the patient at the time, because you could tell there was nothing life-wise that we could do to extend her life, and that's why we went ahead and just monitored from the doorway, left it out. EMS responded, and they got there a few minutes after us, and then the police department got there after us.
And once the police department is there on scene, do you have to kind of keep the scene controlled, or do you hand that off to them?
We hand off the scene security to them after they get on scene. Blood spatter upon the blinds behind her head.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
Captain Reeves, I'm going to show you two photographs that are already in evidence, State's Exhibit 4 and State's Exhibit 6. Looking at those two, do you recognize those photographs? Or
yes.
The contents of the photographs?
Yes, ma'am.
With respect to State's Exhibit 6, you talked about the blood around her head. Is that did the EMS providers
more or less came in and acknowledged that from my visual that they had confirmed.
Here you said you talked what you described as a contractor, or the person that called 911.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall seeing a young female child?
Yes, ma'am.
And where do you recall seeing her?
At first, when we arrived on the scene, she was outside at the stairwell. And then, it was about a few minutes later, after everybody kind of got more on the scene, I believe she ended up coming up to the apartment for a few minutes And I can't remember if,
You recall her not needing some shoes. You recall what else she might have been wearing at that point?
I think she just had on just some basic little light thin pajamas. And like I said, I think it was a little cold and she wanted a blanket and some shoes put on.
After confirming that she was deceased and turning the scene over to the Raleigh Police Department, did you all, that is the fire department, have any additional responsibilities?
No, ma'am.
And at some point after leaving the scene that morning,
Redirect. Thank you, sir. You may step down.
it may be released.
Any objection?
No objection.
Sir, you're released from your subpoena.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated.
Mr. Waller?
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Green, afternoon, sir.
How you doing, sir?
Good, thank you. Can you please state your full name for the record?
I'm Officer Darrell Green, Holly Springs Police Department.
And you are currently with the Holly Springs Police Department. Can you tell us a little bit about your duties and responsibilities there, sir?
In Holly Springs, you know, I patrol. I'm a patrol officer. I receive, you know, dispatch calls from communications and attend those calls and investigate several different types of calls, investigate vehicle break-ins, domestics, all sorts of things.
So if 911 is called, you
Correct.
would respond to the scene. And how long have you been with the Holly Springs Police Department?
About a month.
Okay. Where were you previously employed?
Raleigh Police Department.
And when did you begin with the Raleigh Police Department?
2009.
2009. And so you left at the end of 2015, or?
December 2015.
And so while you were with the Raleigh Police Department, what were your general duties and responsibilities there, sir?
Same thing. I responded to dispatch calls in the Raleigh area, reference to numerous types of calls.
And Officer Green, did you work a specific beat or area of Raleigh when you were employed here, sir?
Yes, I did. I worked North District. My beat area, my specific beat area was off Six Forks Road and out towards Creedmoor Road.
How about the area around Six Forks Road and 440, the North Hills area? Is that an area that you patrolled quite frequently?
Yes.
Officer Green, I want to turn your attention specifically to the morning of May 14th, 2013 at around 7 a.m. Sir, were you on duty, duly sworn, and so employed as a Raleigh police officer at that time?
Yes, I was.
And on that date and time, sir, did you have the opportunity to respond to the Allister apartment complex?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell the members of the jury a little bit about what circumstances led you there to the apartment complex that morning?
I received a call from our communications center in reference to a check-in with EMS or fire out at Allister Drive. Apparently, according to the comments, they needed a supervisor on scene, reference to the nature of the call. I got there fairly quickly. I was actually close by, so I got there probably within minutes of getting that call.
What time did you arrive there?
I mean, I can't really tell you exactly. I know it didn't take long. Probably three to 5 minutes I was there.
And what time did the initial call come out?
I believe it was close to 7. It was early. It was right towards the beginning of my shift, and I started at 7, so it was like right at the beginning. So I got there. My sergeant at the time actually followed in behind me shortly after, probably 20-30 seconds after me, and I actually made contact with the EMS units and fire that were on scene, who gave me a brief synopsis of what was going on.
And you said that based on the nature of the call that a supervisor was requested. What was the general nature of the call as you understood it at that time?
At the time when I got the synopsis from EMS and fire, they advised that there was someone inside that happened to be deceased. During that time, whenever we get a call like that, we have to have a supervisor on scene to kind of instruct and take over the call.
Who was your supervisor that morning, sir?
Sergeant Lampy.
So when you and Sergeant Lampy arrived on scene and spoke with EMS, what did you do then?
We made entry once they told us what they saw. We made entry to verify what they said was, correct, and to basically get as much information as we could related to the call for investigations who would be responding later.
And how does that work, sir? You said you were a patrol officer. You said you get investigations involved. What do you mean by that?
Well, whenever I receive a call, we try to get as much information as we can prior to if an investigator needs it, so that we can pass that information on to them. Whether it's, what the room looked like, what we saw or observed when we made entry, what EMS and them told us, and what we verified.
And so once you arrive and kind of secure the scene, then you get other detectives involved to do the follow-up?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Officer Green, other than the EMS and fire personnel that you saw there, did you come into contact with the young girl Hannah at any time?
Briefly, I believe it was right before we made entry, and I was met by EMS. It was really brief.
How did you and Sergeant Lampy make entry into the apartment, sir?
Through the front door of the apartment, where actually EMS were exiting at the time when we arrived.
And so you were essentially the first law enforcement officer to step foot in that.
That's correct.
Officer Green, when you went into that apartment, did you notice any signs of disturbance or tampering with the front door, the front lock, or anything like that?
I did not notice anything of that nature when I proceeded through. That wasn't my prime objective. I wanted to make sure, the scene was actually in fact secure, and I made entry, and they actually advised me where Miss Jones was.
But if you'd noticed that the front door had been kicked in or pry marks or something like that, would that have been something you would have noted in a report?
Yes.
But you didn't notice anything unusual like that?
I didn't note anything like that in my report.
How about in walking into the apartment again, prior to getting into the bedroom, did you notice anything unusual at that point in terms of the living area of the apartment?
Not to my recollection, but I did notice stuff inside the bedroom.
And is that where you and Sergeant Lampy went?
Direct. Yes.
Tell us what you saw once you arrived there in the bedroom.
When I made entry to the bedroom, the bed immediately is directly in front of you. I observed Miss Jones lying on her back on the bed. I noticed the blinds were disheveled, appearing like there was some sort of struggle. Her head was facing away from me, and I observed blood on her face and neck, and also blood splatter on the back wall behind where I was.
When you say blood splatter, what do you mean by that, sir?
I guess drops of blood that appeared to be on the wall. I don't really know how else to explain it. That's what it looked like to me. It was just blood splatter. I don't know.
Was that, and you said that her head was at the head of the bed, the blood splatter you're talking about. Where was it located?
It was directly behind me, if I recall correctly. So I made actually entry up to the bottom of the bed, the footboard, I guess you'd call it. And as soon as I saw what I saw, I backed out with my sergeant behind me. So we just backed out and secured the scene.
So there was blood on the wall to the rear of you, and then you mentioned the blinds. Where were the blinds located in relation to her head?
To the right of the bed.
And you noticed blood on those as well, or what appeared to be blood?
I noticed that the blinds were disheveled and out of place.
Anything else there that you noticed in the room that led you to believe there had been some sort of struggle or disturbance in that room?
The pillows and stuff I noticed were on the ground. Also outside the bedroom, there were sets of pillows laying on the floor. I thought that was a little unusual. Most pillows would be sitting on the bed, but those were sitting on the floor. in odd spots, I thought.
How about any other items of furniture? They appear to be out of place in any way.
Not that I recall.
And you said once you made these observations, you and Sergeant Lankby backed out at that point?
That's correct.
What happened at that point, Officer Green?
At that point, we locked the scene down.
What do you mean by locking the scene down?
Meaning we don't allow anybody to go back inside the crime scene or at all until investigations get on scene.
Why is that an important Raleigh police procedure?
To maintain evidence of a possible crime there.
And how do you, as a Raleigh police officer, go about locking down a crime scene?
We take a post in front of the door, and then we have other officers who's responding on scene. We rope off the scene with crime scene tape, make sure we have a perimeter set up with different areas to have different officers standing post, and we make sure that there's one area designated to officers coming into the crime scene, so they have to sign in on a crime scene log. And that's what we did.
And so was that your first role of duty in this investigation?
After I locked the scene down with
Yes,
another
sir.
officer, I ended up taking a role as a crime scene recorder, correct?
So any civilian, and even if the family wanted to go into the house at that point, would they be allowed to do so at this point once you have taken over?
No, they wouldn't.
What else did you do out on this scene there that afternoon, or excuse me, that morning, sir?
I did canvass the neighbors in that apartment building.
When you say you did a canvas, what does that mean?
I knock on doors, try to make contact with other residents in the building to try and obtain any other information related to the call or the incident.
Were you able to speak with anyone that morning?
I was not.
Approximately what time was it when you began that canvassing, sir? Do you recall?
I don't really recall, to be honest. I know it was directly after we made contact with investigations, because we had someone already standing post at the front door just to maintain the crime scene, and that's when I began knocking on the doors on that floor I started with that were close by.
And again, sir, did you notice anything out of the ordinary around the doors of those different apartments, such as any tampering or anything like that?
Not that I recall, no.
Besides what you saw in Melissa's bedroom at this point, did you notice anything in the complex that appeared to be out of place or disturbed in any way?
I did not personally observe anything.
Who else? After you did the canvas, what did you do at that point, Officer Green?
That took a little bit, knocking on doors, 'cause I took some time to try to get in touch with neighbors. I then was directed to maintain a crime scene log or stand post at a different area during the investigation.
And at some point, sir, did you have the opportunity to have a conversation with a Michael Langley?
I did.
And what was Michael Langley's role there at the apartment complex, if you know?
If I remember correctly, he was part of, I guess, the security or contracting that was going on out there at the time, because there was construction and stuff going on. It was a new development getting built.
Did you have a conversation with him regarding any issues that Miss Melissa Huggins-Jones was having with her apartment?
Yes, I did.
What was the substance of that conversation?
She said that she was going to be out of town, and it was via text. It was by text message. She stated she was going to be out of town the weekend prior to the incident occurring, and she stated that she needed her air conditioning and something else fixed, but she wasn't going to be at home, and she actually gave him permission to do those adjustments or fixing.
So that she appeared to be having some issues with air conditioning.
Correct.
After your conversation with him, sir, did you have any other roles or duties out there at the crime scene that morning?
Just maintaining the crime scene, doing crime scene log, checking in investigations or whoever else was coming on scene that was part of the police department.
At any point, sir, did anyone that was unauthorized to be in that crime scene make entry into the apartment?
No, they didn't.
And Detective Brady, was he one of the investigators that responded out there that night?
I believe so. I don't recognize him, to be honest. I don't recall. at the time.
But he's someone within investigations that could have come out there.
Yes, if he was part of investigations, yes.
Thank you, Officer Green. I don't have any further questions at this time.
Cross-examination.
Just briefly, when you got there, where was Hannah?
Where was Hannah? And she's the daughter. She was in the EMS truck in the parking lot.
And you said that you restricted access so nobody else could come in afterwards.
After we made sure what was happening.
While you were there, did you ever go out onto the balcony?
I never did, no.
Okay, right. Thank you. Thank you. No further questions.
All right, thank you. Any redirect?
No, sir.
Thank you, sir. You may step down. Any objection to
No objection.
this officer being excused? Sir, you're released from your subpoena. You're free to go.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, at this time, the state would call Sergeant Brian Lampy to the stand.
Afternoon, Your Honor.
Do you solemnly swear testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated.
Mr. Waller.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sergeant Lampy, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Will you please state your name for the record?
Yes, I'm Sergeant Brian Lampy with the Raleigh Police Department.
And Sergeant Lampy, how long have you been with the Raleigh Police Department total?
Close to 17 years,
How long have you been a sergeant with the Raleigh Police Department?
since September of 2012.
And Sergeant Lampy, can you tell the members of the jury a little bit about what your specific roles are as a sergeant with the Raleigh Police Department versus, we just heard from Officer Green, who's a patrol officer?
Certainly. As a sergeant, I'm responsible for supervising a group of officers. In this particular case, a squad of, I believe, 6 officers who respond to 911 calls for service, provide assistance to the community in a variety of different capacities. On a daily basis, I am out in the field with them, checking in with them on calls, providing any kind of support assistance that they might need that I can provide for them, ensuring that they
Does Officer Green report to you and you have him do different duties, follow up, whatnot, if required to do so?
Yes, that's correct.
And Sergeant Lampy, what's a typical shift like for a Raleigh police officer in terms of time? Is it a 12-hour shift or 6-hour, 8-hour shift? What's the typical time frame there?
Our patrol division works 12-hour shifts. Depending on what squad you're assigned to, you may come in at 6 o'clock in the morning and work until 6 o'clock at night, or you may come in at 7 o'clock in the morning and work until 7 at night, or vice versa.
And going back to May of 2013, do you recall what type of schedule your squad was working on May 14th of 2013?
Yes, we were assigned to a day shift, so we were working 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. that day.
And Sergeant Lampy, back on May 14th, 2013, were you on duty, duly sworn, and so employed as a sergeant with the Raleigh Police Department, excuse me?
Yes, I was.
On that date and time, sir, on that date, did you have the opportunity to respond to the Allister apartment complex?
Yes, I did.
And can you tell us a little bit about under what circumstances you responded to the Allister apartment complex?
Certainly. Right after shift change, we have roll call at the beginning of every shift. Shortly after the officers went out into the field to begin their shift, a call was dispatched to check in with the MS down at Allister Drive. I believe the address was 340 Allister Drive. They had the remarks in the call indicated that there was a young girl that they had in their custody and that there was a potential crime scene. I heard the call go out. I did not respond initially because that's typically not the type of call that I would immediately respond to. I heard Officer Green get dispatched to the call, and the call come through on the computer screen where we get dispatched, read the remarks in the call, determined that there might be a need for me as a supervisor to be out there on the scene, so he called me to let me know what he had seen in the call and the details that were provided in the call, and so at that point I began to proceed in that direction.
And where was kind of your base, or where were you coming from on that morning?
Up in the 6700 block, so just north of Lynn Road. So a couple miles, maybe two and a half miles from the location at Allister Drive. Not a very far distance at all.
With that headquarters being there, is there a pretty heavy police traffic through that North Hills area, or police presence there in the North Hills area?
I would say so, yes.
And so were you taking over for another sergeant that would have gone off duty at 7 a.m. that morning as well?
Yes, I was.
Lampy, do you know who that sergeant was that you took over for?
There were actually two sergeants assigned to the squad that worked the night shift. I specifically remember Sergeant Tom Connors was working that previous evening. I can't say for sure one way or the other whether Sergeant Morgan was working. I want to say that maybe he was out sick that night, but Sergeant Connors was the off-going supervisor and I was the oncoming.
And are you aware if Sergeant Connors is still with the Raleigh Police Department?
No, he has since retired.
What you mentioned that the young girl was in custody at that point. She wasn't arrested, and she was just with.
Well, EMS had her in their protective custody because she was young in age, and when I arrived down at the apartment complex, I actually pulled in the parking lot directly behind the ambulance, and the back doors of the ambulance were open, and I could see the young girl sitting inside the ambulance with the paramedics. Officer Green had already arrived, and at that point, I spoke briefly with the paramedics, and then Officer Green kind of gave me the rundown of what he had received from them.
And did you have any interaction with the young girl there in the ambulance as well, or did you...
Nothing significant. I believe I asked her if she was okay, and tried to put her at ease. At that point, I didn't really know what was going on. I had an idea of what we might be going into, but I wasn't sure. So I just checked with the paramedics to see if she was okay physically and make sure that they were good to maintain protective custody of her while we went in and assessed the situation.
And I may have already asked you this, Sergeant Lampy, and I apologize if I did. Do you recall what time it was when you actually arrived?
I don't have I can't give you a specific time. It was in the neighborhood of 7:25 to 7:30 in the morning.
So what did you and Officer Green do at this point, sir?
After I arrived, as I said, I spoke with the EMTs, talked to Officer Green. During that time, another officer also arrived on scene, Officer Varnell with the police department. He was another one of the officers that worked for me on my squad. Officer Green and I, after he told me what he had received from the paramedics, we decided that we were going to conduct a security sweep of the apartment that the paramedics had kind of given us directions to. So Officer Green and I went up to the front door of the apartment, which was unsecured, and we conducted a security sweep of the apartment, just walked through just to verify that there was nobody inside. We had already been informed by the paramedics that there was.
And did you notice anything out of the ordinary, any signs of a struggle in the other areas of the apartment prior to entering this Huggins-Jones bedroom?
I do not recall seeing anything out of place other than what I saw inside the bedroom.
You ever go outside on the balcony at any point?
No.
What'd you see once you entered Miss Huggins-Jones' room?
Well, we went in just briefly, stepped in the doorway. I noticed immediately Miss Huggins-Jones was on a bed, looked like maybe a queen-size bed that was up against the far wall. Headboard was up against that wall. She was laying on the bed on her back, kind of in a diagonal fashion. Her head was tilted towards the right as we were looking at her. There was a significant amount of blood on the bed. There was blood spatter on the wall to our right, on the opposite wall from where she was laying. I noticed that there were bed linens on the floor, pillows on the floor to the left side of the bed as we were looking in the room. Also noticed that there were mini blinds that were on the window that were significantly damaged. It was pretty clear to me that there had been a struggle in the room, and I mean that's about the best I can describe it.
How long were you in that room, Sergeant Lamp?
I'd say probably no more than 15 seconds. As soon as we got in there and we ascertained that there was definitely going to be some type of a crime scene. At that point, we didn't know what had happened. We were still trying to kind of put the pieces together. It became clear pretty much right away that we were going to have a crime scene, so I asked Officer Green to follow me out. We backed out of the apartment. We didn't touch anything. In fact, I don't think we touched anything at all the entire time we were in there, aside from our feet on the floor. We backed out. Officer Varnell at that point had taken up a position outside the apartment at the exterior door that led into the foyer area and the living area that I was describing earlier. And so we backed out, secured the apartment. I called for additional resources to come assist us because at that point it was pretty clear that we were going to have a fairly significant investigation in front of us. So yeah, so we got out, secured the apartment, and then we began the process of, I began the process of making assignments for crime scene security, crime scene recorder, asking officers to put crime scene tape up in the area, and calling additional resources in.
You mentioned, Sergeant Lampy, that part of what you made sure you didn't touch anything as you were coming in or out. And we've asked a lot of witnesses about that. Why is it important for you and your Officer Green and other folks that go in there to not touch anything at this point?
Well, obviously, whenever we have a crime scene, one of the most important things is the preservation of any potential evidence that's at the crime scene. So we have pretty much a hands-off kind of a rule that we use whenever we suspect that there might be a crime that needs to be investigated. It's very important that we don't get our fingerprints on stuff that a suspect's fingerprints might be on. We don't disturb any evidence. The detectives have a methodical process that they use when they process a crime scene. Our City County Bureau of Identification, the forensic folks that come out, really appreciate it when we don't mess anything up for them. So as a rule and best practices that we follow, we back out, don't touch anything, and just so that we can preserve as much evidence as possible.
So once you secure a crime scene and make sure it's safe, that's the point in which you turn it over to other individuals from Detective Division. Then you also mentioned City County Bureau of Identification, the CSI.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that I did right away was I called. You know what? I don't think I called the detectives. I want to say that Detective Brady heard this on the radio and responded on his own. But I mean, that would have been the logical progression of the investigation, is that I would have called for detective resources to come in to assist. But yes, as patrol units, our primary responsibility is to secure the scene. And then once we've got the scene secured, we back out, allow the detective division to bring their personnel in because that's what they do, and they do it well.
And you mentioned Detective Brady seated behind me here in the courtroom.
Yeah, I want to say he showed up. I was shocked when he showed up. That kind of what spurred my memory is seeing his face sitting behind you. He showed up before I could even get on the radio to ask for him. So I'm not sure. He was assigned, I think, to a different detective unit at the time. But yeah, he was there pretty much right away.
And then you mentioned that you went on to do some administrative jobs about assigning people to different roles. Was that your primary focus throughout the rest of the investigation that day?
Yes. Yeah, we had a command post, a mobile command post that was brought out to the scene. From that point forward, I managed the patrol officer contingency that was on the scene. We had a great number of patrol officers that were providing crime scene security, doing canvasses, and one of the responsibilities that I have is to make sure that everybody gets properly relieved and gets food and bathroom breaks, and because these can be often long, drawn-out processes that, and I'm sure Detective Brady will tell you, these crime scenes often get held for days.
How long were you out there that day, Sergeant Lee?
I was out there the entirety of my shift, so about 7 or 7:30 I was relieved by the oncoming supervisor, sergeant, and I honestly don't remember who that was. It might have been Sergeant Connors again.
During the course of this investigation, and even as recently as this month, were you contacted by myself and asked to do some follow-up research on Sergeant Connors and his shift, the morning leading up, the early morning hours leading up to 7 a.m.?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you were asked to do?
Yeah, I believe you asked me to try to verify if there were any patrol units that were out on that had patrolled through the area that previous night between 11 o'clock at night and 3 o'clock in the morning. So I went back and I was able to pull up our CAD history, so the calls for service that were in the computer system that night out there, and I was able to verify that there were several officers out there between the hours of, I think it was about 12:30, 12:20 that night, and about 3 o'clock in the morning. There were several officers that were responding to a couple different calls. One was he actually put himself out on a security check.
You mentioned, before we get any further on that, you mentioned CAD history. What do you mean by CAD history? Is that?
I'm sorry, CAD is an acronym for computer-aided dispatch. Our CAD system is essentially a computer system, software system, where we get, whenever 911 calls come into the emergency communications center, they're put into a computer, and then when an officer is dispatched to a call, that call is relayed electronically somehow to our computers in our car. And so when we get the call, it shows up on our screen with a bunch of different information, including the location and the nature of the call and what time and date and officers that are dispatched, any remarks that might be associated with the call that the call taker may have put in. So there's an electronic record of all of most of the police activity out there that night.
And during the course of this investigation, even back in May of 2013, were you aware, and specifically on May 14th, that there were two different investigations that began to develop that day in terms of the homicide and then also something that was going on in the neighborhood? Yes. What was going on in the neighborhood that was being investigated at the same time this homicide was being investigated?
Right. Well, there was at least one report of a vehicle that had been broken into in that immediate area. I was able to confirm that through our CAD system. There was a call that was generated. It was around 12:15 in the morning on I guess it would be the 14th, and an officer was dispatched to that area. Prior to that, there was a suspicious person call that somebody had called in, indicating that there was somebody in the area that was raising concern for one reason or the other. So the suspicious person call was the first call. An officer responded to that, did not find anybody, and cleared that call. And then shortly thereafter, larceny from motor vehicle call came in, which is essentially a vehicle break-in. That same officer went back out there, and this time, I think probably because the other officers had heard him get dispatched to that suspicious person call earlier, other officers went and checked in with him on that call, just for support reasons. And so we had initially the one officer respond, and then for the suspicious person, then I believe 3 officers, one of them being Sergeant Connors, responded out to the larceny from motor vehicle call that came in very shortly after Officer Strawn cleared that suspicious person call.
And that activity in terms of officers being out on the scene that night would be reflected in that CAD report?
Yes.
If I may approach the witness, Your Honor.
Yes.
Sergeant Lampy, I'm handing you what has been marked for identification purposes, State's Exhibit 13. If you'll take a look at that document and tell me if you recognize what that document is.
It's the CAD calls that I sent you the other day.
Okay. And are those CAD calls, call dispatches, are they kept in the regular course of business there in the Raleigh Police Department?
Yes.
And as a sergeant with the Raleigh Police Department, do you have access to these call dispatches that are reflected in that document?
Yes.
Any changes or alterations to that document since the time you sent it to?
There don't appear to be.
Your Honor, this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 13 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, sir.
It's allowed.
Sergeant Lampy, in looking at State's Exhibit 13, you mentioned that there was an officer that was called out to the Allister area. What was the first time that an officer was dispatched to that area?
At 12:17 in the morning, and forgive me for my poor memory, Officer Wegner, not Officer Strawn, was dispatched to a suspicious person call in the area of Ramblewood Drive and Bellevue Road, which is...
And if I may approach him, Your Honor.
Yes.
I'm going to show you an overhead map of this area, Sergeant Lampy.
Sure.
And if you need to stand up, that's perfectly fine. And you can refer to the CAD sheet as we go along if you need to. But if you'll just kind of tell the members of the jury just this general area in which we're talking about where the car break-ins are happening at this point.
So the car break-in call that was dispatched to Officer Wegner that night was at 340 Allister Drive. And if we are looking at this map here, Ramblewood Road comes obviously down from Six Forks Road, and Allister Drive is in this area down here. Actually, I apologize. Got to go a little bit further around and actually enter off of Ramblewood Drive down in this area. Let me just make sure that I'm recalling accurately.
A little off the map there.
Okay. So I'm assuming that Ramblewood Drive comes all the way around here, and then we access Allister Drive from this direction. But essentially, the best of my recollection, well, you're asking where the vehicle break-ins were.
Yeah.
Allister Drive area, right in this vicinity.
Okay, and that's where officers responded to starting at around 12:17 a.m.?
Well, 12:17, the suspicious person call came in at Ramblewood Drive and Bellevue Road, which is actually up here at this intersection. As you can see, very close in proximity to the area where we ended up responded to that morning.
Sure.
And we're ended very close to where the vehicle break-ins were occurring.
So 1217 is the first officer in the area, then you said at Ramblewood and Bellevue?
He actually arrived at 12:22. He was dispatched at 12:17, got there at 12:22. Second officer checked in with him, Officer Williams checked in with him and arrived at 12:27.
And then the next call for service that you had in this area?
Was the break-in of breaking and entering of motor vehicle call. That was dispatched to Officer Wegner at 12:43, and he arrived on scene to that call at 12:52 in the morning.
What was the location of that call?
That was at 340 Allister Drive, so that was in this area down here.
And do you have the person that called in or made the complaint?
It's on here somewhere. Let me just take a look. Yes,
Who was that?
Esther Hall.
So at 12, again, what was that time? Sorry.
She called at looks like 12:41 in the morning was the time the call was put into our CAD system.
And then how an officer responded to that area at that time?
Yes, actually that was Officer Wegner, Sergeant Connors, and Officer Strong.
And how long were they at that call?
First officer arrived at 12:52 in the morning, and he actually closed the call out. Doesn't necessarily mean he was there the entire time. He closed the call out at 2:19 a.m. Officer Strong and Sergeant Connors both cleared the scene, closed the call out. I need to make that distinction. Just because they closed the call out doesn't necessarily mean that they've left the area. It just means that they're done with their responsibilities on that call. So as check-in officers, once they've arrived and assisted the officer, the primary officer, to the extent that they're going to assist them, they'll close the call out. That doesn't necessarily mean that they leave the area. Officer Wegner closed his call out at 2:19 in the morning, indicating that he had filed a report. So just based on the times that are on the CAD call here, it appears that there were officers there for this second call between the hours of 12:52 in the morning and 2:19.
And was there any other calls reflected on that CAD report?
You mean on that?
For that area?
For that night?
Yes, sir.
So Officer Wegner put himself out. This was not a call for service that we received from a citizen. He just self-initiated a call for a security check at 340 Allister Drive at 2:19 in the morning. And
that's back in this area again?
Correct.
Down in the townhome and single-family homes area of Allister Drive?
Yes.
Can you tell from that report, sir, if any of the officers were circulating through the area around the apartment complex?
I cannot tell from this report where they were. I mean, it's very, very possible that, I'm sure, knowing these officers the way that I know them, that they saturated that area and thoroughly patrolled the area, particularly because of the suspicious person call and then the subsequent breaking and entering of the vehicle. They would have known at that point that those two were...
Objection.
Sustained.
So, Sergeant Lampy, the car break-ins were in the Allister Drive area, and then this building here is the residence of Miss Melissa Huggins-Jones.
Yes, that's correct.
So there were officers in the scene from 12:22 a.m. all the way through 2:19 a.m.?
Yes.
I may have this in moment, right?
Yes, sir.
Allister Drive and the Allister Apartments, is that within Wake County, North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina?
Yes, it is.
Within your jurisdiction?
Yes.
No further questions at this time, Joe.
Cross-examination.
Just 1 second.
Briefly, if I approach you,
Yes.
Sergeant,
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to ask you two follow-up questions.
Certainly. Do you need this?
This,
Okay.
this is what I need.
All right.
So two quick questions. I believe, and I know that this area has changed a lot since then, and but you just described this area down here on Allister Drive as being the area where there are single-family homes. I believe was the townhouses and single-family homes.
Yes,
Do you see this large building right here?
I do.
Is that a townhouse or a single-family home, or is that an apartment complex?
I can't say for sure, but it appears to be an apartment complex.
And just so we're all, Allister Drive, is it cut off at the time that this picture is taken because of the construction area?
I remember there was quite a bit of construction at the time. Having now looked at this a little bit more closely, I have my bearings a little bit better than I did initially.
Right.
But yes, there was quite a bit of construction going on.
So this part up here by where the victim's apartment was is Allister Drive, correct?
I believe so, yes.
And it's also Allister Drive down here where the officers were responding on that CAD report.
I mean, I'm only going by the map
Okay.
at this point, but yes, if the map is correct, that would be true.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Anything further, Ms. D?
No, thank you.
And Mr. Waller, any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You may
Thank
step
you, Your
down.
Honor. Shall I leave this up here?
Yes, please, if you'll leave that there. No objection. All right, sir, you're released from your subpoena and you are free to go.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We'll go ahead and take a 15-minute recess and we'll resume court at 5 minutes till 4. What I'm going to ask members of the jury to do, first of all, is recall the rules and instructions I've given you. Leave your notepads. For those of you who want to go down the elevators through the lobby, go ahead and make that decision now and make your way. I'm going to ask one of the bailiffs to walk with you, and then once you are down those elevators, then we'll release the members of the gallery just to make some separation between members of the juries who wish to use that lobby and then the members of the gallery. So go ahead and head on out if that's what you intend to do. Of course, you're welcome to stay in the deliberation room if you choose to. Everyone else, please remain seated. Address the one issue on the education records. The one thing that I'm not clear about is that I understand that there may be some teachers or educators called or that are on the witness list, and I assume that's for the mitigation witnesses.
That's correct.
In the records I've reviewed, many of them I'm going to allow the defense's motion to not provide those to the state. But there are records, and I think without betraying the confidence of those records, I can generally describe them as either attendance records, report cards, or policy or rule violation reports. And those, I believe, would be probative for impeachment purposes during the relevant time period that a mitigation witness may be talking about. And so I need a little clarity as to the time periods that mitigation witnesses may be referring to. And then my inclination would be to release those sorts of records to the state for impeachment purposes. And I can, I've identified with stickers the examples of the types of records that I would be inclined to release and what I would I think the next best step would be is to return these records to the defense so they can see the sorts of records that I'm inclined to release. And then I would ask the defense to provide me with the time frames that any mitigation witness may be talking about. And if they have further objection to me releasing the categories of records that I've tabbed here, I would receive any further arguments again in camera on that. So that's the process that I'd be inclined to follow.
What would you like us to have a response to?
I think this is something probably that can be done within, certainly within the next 3 days or so. So I think if you'd go ahead and take care of that. But in large part, like I say, there's certainly information here that I'm going to allow the objection to releasing. And I think that'll be clear the categories that would apply to.
Judge, I'd just like to know, I don't know what you're talking about in terms of specific, I mean, I know what you're talking about, but my concern only is that if part that you're keeping out is someone that they're calling, I think we would be entitled to use that for impeachment of that witness. And so you know better about that type of information, so I just want to leave that objection to the record, because it's my understanding we've gotten some records from one teacher as well as a teacher added to the witness list, and I feel like if they're going to testify, we should have the substance of their reports.
Exactly. I think maybe the best thing is the time frame and then a very general description of the anticipated testimony of that teacher.
And that can be provided to you in camera?
In camera. I think that would be the best way to just continue the in-camera motion as has been done so far. And allow me to review that not in great detail, but just so I have an understanding of the time frame and the nature of the testimony so that I can make a more informed decision about which records would be probative for impeachment purposes.
Yes, sir.
So I have just a sort of logistical question. In terms of identifying timeframes, what makes the most sense to me, Your Honor, would be to identify that in terms of the teachers that are on our list of possible witnesses, the timeframes be identified as the years that Travion was their student. And so the timeframes could be sort of synonymous, like, you know, teacher so-and-so, year so-and-so.
That's fine. 9th grade, 2010, whatever. All of those would be really what I need.
And once we see the type of records you're inclined to disclose, if we have no objection to that teacher's or that whatever time frame of that type of records being disclosed, we can just indicate that. And then if we do have any objections, when we get that list together, we can tell Your Honor just a brief synopsis of what the anticipated nature of their testimony would be and why we have a continued objection.
I think that'll be fine.
Okay, thank you.
All right, very good. All right, anything else?
No, sir.
Before we recess? All right, we'll be in recess until 4 o'clock.
Superior Court,